The Admiral's Mistake. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood at attention in Admiral Morrison's office, her eyes fixed on the American flag hanging behind his massive oak desk. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Naval Base headquarters, casting long shadows across the polished floor. She had been called here without warning, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Admiral Morrison was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. His gray hair was perfectly styled, his uniform pressed to perfection, and his chest decorated with ribbons that told stories of battles fought and won. He had spent 30 years climbing the ranks of the Navy, earning his position through determination and an iron will. But today, something was different about him. His usually calm demeanor seemed strained, and there was a hardness in his eyes that Sarah had never seen before. "Lieutenant Chen," he began, his voice cold and formal, "I've been reviewing your file, and I have some serious concerns about your performance and attitude." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had always been a model officer, graduating top of her class from the Naval Academy. Her flight records were spotless, and she had never received so much as a minor reprimand. She couldn't understand what had brought this on. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the confusion swirling in her mind. The Admiral leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers drumming against the desk. "Your recent mission reports show a pattern of insubordination. You've been questioning orders, making unauthorized decisions in the field, and frankly, I don't think you have what it takes to be part of this elite team." Sarah's mind raced back through her recent missions. She had indeed made some quick decisions during combat situations, but they had all been successful. In fact, her quick thinking had saved lives on more than one occasion. She had always been taught that a good pilot adapts to changing circumstances, and that's exactly what she had done. "Sir, with respect, every decision I made was within standard operating procedures. The situations required immediate action, and I followed my training," Sarah explained, trying to keep the frustration out of her voice. Admiral Morrison stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked over to the window, looking out at the busy naval base beyond. Sailors and officers moved about their daily duties, unaware of the drama unfolding in the office above them. Fighter jets roared overhead, their engines creating a thunderous symphony that was music to any pilot's ears. "Lieutenant, I've made my decision," he said without turning around. "You're being transferred off this base effective immediately. Your security clearance is being reviewed, and until further notice, you're grounded." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Being grounded was every pilot's worst nightmare. It meant no flying, no missions, no purpose. For someone who had dedicated her life to serving her country in the skies, it was like being told she could no longer breathe. "Admiral, please reconsider," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Flying is my life, this base, this mission. It's everything I've worked for." But Morrison had already made up his mind. He turned back to face her, his expression hard and unforgiving. "Pack your things, Lieutenant. You have 24 hours to clear out of your quarters. Your replacement will be arriving tomorrow." As Sarah walked out of the Admiral's office, her mind was spinning. She couldn't understand what had just happened. Her fellow pilots in the hallway looked at her with curiosity and concern. Word traveled fast on a military base, and already people were beginning to whisper about why one of their best pilots was being sent away. Captain Mike Rodriguez, her squadron leader and longtime friend, caught up with her as she walked toward the pilot quarters. "Sarah, what's going on?" "The Admiral just called me and told me you're being transferred." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him. Mike had been like a big brother to her since she arrived at the base. He was an experienced pilot with 15 years of service, and his opinion carried weight with everyone, including the higher-ups. "I honestly don't know, Mike," she said, shaking her head. "He said I was insubordinate, but I can't think of anything I've done wrong. My mission success rate is perfect. My evaluations are all excellent. Mike frowned, his weathered face showing genuine concern. This doesn't make sense. You're one of the best pilots we have. Hell, you're probably the best pilot I've ever seen, and I've worked with some real hotshots over the years. They walked together toward the quarters, passing groups of enlisted personnel who snapped to attention as they went by. The base was like a small city, with thousands of people all working together toward the same goal of defending their country. Sarah had always felt at home here, surrounded by people who understood the calling of military service. Maybe it's political, Mike suggested. You know how these things can get. Sometimes the brass makes decisions that don't make sense to the rest of us. Sarah considered this possibility. She had always tried to stay out of military politics, focusing instead on being the best pilot she could be. But perhaps her success had made someone uncomfortable. Maybe there were people who didn't like seeing a young woman excel in a field that had traditionally been dominated by men. As they reached her quarters, Sarah began the heartbreaking task of packing up her life. Her room was small but comfortable, decorated with photos of her family and mementos from her various assignments. On her desk sat a model of an F-22 Raptor, the most advanced fighter jet in the American arsenal. She had dreamed of flying one since she was a little girl, watching air shows with her father. Her father had been a pilot too, flying missions during the Gulf War. He had taught her that flying wasn't just about controlling a machine. It was about becoming one with it, understanding every sound, every vibration, every subtle change in performance. He had also taught her that sometimes life would knock her down, but the important thing was to get back up and keep fighting. As Sarah carefully wrapped the model plane in bubble wrap, she made a silent promise to herself. This setback wouldn't be the end of her story. Somehow, some way, she would prove that Admiral Morrison had made a mistake. She would show everyone that she deserved to be in the sky, protecting her country and her fellow service members. The next morning, Sarah loaded her belongings into her car and prepared to leave the base that had been her home for the past 3 years. As she drove through the main gate for what she thought might be the last time, she looked back at the runway where sleek fighter jets sat ready for action. The sight filled her with both sadness and determination. She didn't know where she was being transferred or what her new assignment would be. All she knew was that this wasn't over. Admiral Morrison might have thought he was ending her career, but Sarah Chen was far from finished. She had skills and knowledge that couldn't be taught in any classroom, and she was determined to prove her worth, no matter how long it took. The road ahead was uncertain, but Sarah had faced uncertainty before. She had navigated through storms that would terrify most people, had made split-second decisions at supersonic speeds, and had always found a way to complete her missions. This new challenge would be no different. She would adapt, she would overcome, and eventually, she would soar again. The secret mission. 6 months had passed since Sarah's departure from the naval base, and life had become a daily struggle against despair. Her new assignment was at a small administrative post in Nevada, where she spent her days pushing papers and filing reports. It was the kind of work that slowly crushed the spirit of someone born to fly. Every morning, she would wake up hoping to receive orders that would put her back in the cockpit, but each day brought only more bureaucratic tasks. The desert facility was nothing like the bustling naval base she had left behind. Here, there were no roaring engines, no smell of jet fuel, no camaraderie of fellow pilots. Just endless rows of filing cabinets and the constant hum of air conditioning fighting against the Nevada heat. Sarah felt like a caged eagle, her wings clipped and her purpose forgotten. But everything changed on a Tuesday morning when a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the administrative building. Sarah watched from her office window as 2 men in dark suits got out and walked purposefully toward the entrance. Something about their bearing told her they weren't ordinary government employees. They moved with the confidence of people who carried serious authority. 20 minutes later, Sarah's supervisor, Colonel Williams, appeared at her desk, looking unusually nervous. "Lieutenant Chen, you have visitors in Conference Room B. They're waiting for you now." Sarah's heart began to race as she walked down the hallway. She had no idea who these men were or what they wanted with her. When she opened the conference room door, the two men stood up immediately. The older of the two, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and piercing blue eyes, extended his hand. "Lieutenant Chen, I'm Director Harrison from a classified government agency. This is Agent Martinez. Please have a seat." Sarah sat down cautiously, her mind racing with possibilities. Classified government agency could mean CIA, NSA, or any number of secret organizations that most people never heard about. Whatever this was, it was clearly serious. Director Harrison opened a thick manila folder and spread several photographs across the table. Sarah recognized them immediately as satellite images of what appeared to be a military installation, but unlike any she had ever seen. The structures looked advanced, almost futuristic, and there were aircraft on the runways that she couldn't identify. "What you're looking at," Harrison began, "is a hostile installation in a location I cannot disclose. Our intelligence suggests they're developing weapons technology that could pose a significant threat to national security." Agent Martinez leaned forward. "We need someone with your specific skill set to get close enough to gather intelligence. The mission would require flying deep into enemy territory, evading sophisticated radar systems, and returning with crucial data." Sarah studied the photographs more carefully. The aircraft in the images were unlike anything in the American arsenal. They appeared to be experimental fighters with designs that defied conventional aerospace engineering. Whatever was happening at this facility, it was cutting-edge and dangerous. "Why me?" Sarah asked. "There are hundreds of qualified pilots with security clearances higher than mine." Director Harrison smiled slightly. "Because your flight record shows something special, Lieutenant. You have an ability to adapt and improvise that can't be taught. Every mission you've flown has been completed successfully, often under conditions that would have caused other pilots to abort." He pulled out another file, this one containing Sarah's complete military record. "Your flight instructors describe you as having almost supernatural instincts in the cockpit. You read aircraft systems like other people read books. And most importantly, you've proven you can make the right decisions under extreme pressure." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This was clearly the opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to prove herself and get back to doing what she loved. But it was also obviously incredibly dangerous. "What would I be flying?" she asked. Agent Martinez exchanged a look with Director Harrison before answering. "An experimental aircraft that officially doesn't exist. It's faster, more maneuverable, and more advanced than anything currently in service. But it's also untested in combat situations." For the next 2 hours, the men briefed Sarah on details of the mission. The installation they needed to infiltrate was protected by some of the most advanced air defense systems ever created. Getting in and out alive would require flying skills that pushed the boundaries of human capability. "I'll need time to study the aircraft and the mission parameters," Sarah said finally. "You'll have 2 weeks of intensive training at a classified facility," Harrison replied. "But I need to know now if you're willing to accept this assignment. Once you say yes, there's no backing out." Sarah thought about Admiral Morrison and how he had dismissed her as unfit for service. She thought about the months of frustration and wasted potential. Most of all, she thought about her father's words about getting back up when life knocked you down. "I accept," she said, without hesitation. The next morning, Sarah found herself on a military transport plane, heading to a location that didn't appear on any map. She was the only passenger, and the crew had been instructed not to speak with her about their destination. As the plane flew over endless miles of desert, Sarah wondered what she had gotten herself into. The classified facility turned out to be a marvel of modern engineering hidden beneath the Nevada desert. Underground hangars housed aircraft that looked like they had come from science fiction movies. The pilots and technicians working there moved with the quiet efficiency of people involved in world-changing projects. Sarah's training began immediately with a briefing on her assigned aircraft. It was designated only as Project Phantom, and when she first saw it, she understood why. The fighter was sleek and angular, with a design that seemed to bend light around it. Its engines were unlike anything she had ever seen, and its cockpit was filled with displays and controls that would take years to master under normal circumstances. "You have 2 weeks to become proficient enough to fly a combat mission," her instructor, a veteran test pilot named Colonel Brooks, told her. "Most pilots need 6 months just to understand the basic systems." But Sarah was not most pilots. She absorbed information like a sponge, spending 18 hours a day studying manuals, running simulations, and learning every detail of the aircraft's capabilities. The Phantom responded to pilot input in ways that seemed almost magical, as if it could read the pilot's intentions and amplify them. During her training flights, Sarah discovered that the aircraft was more than just fast and maneuverable. It had stealth capabilities that made it nearly invisible to radar, and its weapon systems were more accurate than anything she had ever used. Flying the Phantom was like conducting a symphony orchestra where every instrument responded perfectly to the conductor's baton. As her training progressed, Sarah began to understand the true scope of the mission. The hostile installation wasn't just developing new weapons. They were creating technology that could shift the balance of power in the world. If their research succeeded, it would make current military technology obsolete overnight. On her final training day, Colonel Brooks pulled her aside for a private conversation. "I've been testing experimental aircraft for 20 years," he said, "and I've never seen anyone master a new system as quickly as you have. You're ready for this mission, but I want you to understand something." He paused, looking out at the Phantom sitting in the hangar. "This aircraft represents billions of dollars in research and development. But more than that, it represents hope. Hope that we can stay ahead of our enemies and protect the people we've sworn to defend." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility that was being placed on her shoulders. She wasn't just flying a mission. She was carrying the hopes and fears of an entire nation. That night, as she prepared for the mission that would launch at dawn, Sarah wrote a letter to her father. She couldn't tell him where she was or what she was about to do, but she wanted him to know that she was finally doing what she was meant to do. She was about to prove that Admiral Morrison had made the biggest mistake of his career. The hero's return. The mission had been a complete success, though Sarah could never speak of the details to anyone without the highest security clearance. What she could say was that the intelligence she gathered had prevented a catastrophic attack on American soil and saved countless lives. The experimental aircraft had performed flawlessly, and her piloting skills had been tested in ways that most aviators could never imagine. When she returned to the classified facility 3 days after her mission, Director Harrison was waiting with news that would change everything. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, "your actions have earned you the highest commendations this country can bestow. You've also earned something else that might be even more valuable to you." He handed her a sealed envelope with official government letterhead. Inside was an order transferring her back to her original naval base, along with a promotion to captain and a commendation from the president himself. But what caught her attention most was the signature at the bottom of the transfer order. It was from Admiral Morrison himself. "How is this possible?" Sarah asked, hardly believing what she was reading. "Let's just say that certain people in very high places have become aware of your exceptional abilities," Harrison replied with a smile. "Admiral Morrison received a very direct phone call from someone he couldn't ignore. He's been informed that dismissing you was a serious error in judgment." 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself driving through the familiar gates of the naval base she had been forced to leave 8 months earlier. Everything looked exactly the same, but she felt completely different. The woman who had left this place in disgrace was gone, replaced by someone who had proven herself under the most extreme circumstances possible. As she parked outside the base headquarters, Sarah noticed several familiar faces watching her arrival. Word had somehow spread that she was returning, and people were curious to see what had happened to the pilot who had disappeared so mysteriously. Admiral Morrison was waiting in his office when Sarah arrived. But his demeanor was completely different from their last meeting. He stood up respectfully when she entered, and there was no trace of the arrogance that had characterized their previous encounter. "Captain Chen," he said, using her new rank with obvious difficulty. "Please, have a seat." Sarah remained standing at attention. "Sir, reporting for duty as ordered." The Admiral gestured again to the chair across from his desk. "Please, Captain, we have much to discuss." As Sarah finally took her seat, Morrison walked over to the same window where he had delivered her dismissal months earlier. The view was the same, but everything else had changed dramatically. "Captain Chen, I owe you an apology," he began, his voice lacking its former authority. "I've been informed by the highest levels of our government that I made a serious mistake in my assessment of your abilities and character." He turned back to face her, and Sarah could see genuine discomfort in his eyes. "I've also been told in no uncertain terms that you've served your country with extraordinary distinction in ways I cannot be briefed on. Apparently, your actions have had implications for national security at the highest level." Sarah maintained her professional composure, though inside she felt a deep satisfaction. "Thank you, sir. I've always tried to serve to the best of my abilities." Admiral Morrison nodded slowly. "I'm assigning you to lead our most elite squadron. You'll have your choice of aircraft and missions, and your recommendations will carry significant weight with my staff." Just then, there was a commotion outside the office. Through the window, Sarah could see a convoy of black vehicles approaching the headquarters building. Admiral Morrison's secretary knocked on the door and entered quickly. "Sir, we have VIP visitors arriving. They specifically requested to meet with Captain Chen." The Admiral looked puzzled, but Sarah had a feeling she knew who these visitors might be. She had been told that her mission would have far-reaching consequences, and apparently those consequences were still unfolding. 10 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the base's main briefing room, surrounded by some of the most elite military personnel she had ever seen. These weren't ordinary soldiers or sailors. Their bearing and the quiet confidence in their eyes told her these were Special Forces operators of the highest caliber. A man with a weathered face and steel-gray eyes stepped forward. His uniform identified him as a Navy SEAL commander, and the ribbons on his chest told stories of battles fought in the darkest corners of the world. "Captain Chen," he said in a voice that commanded instant respect. "I'm Commander Jackson. My team and I wanted to meet the pilot who prevented the attack our intelligence services discovered was being planned." Sarah was confused. She hadn't been briefed on any connection between her mission and SEAL operations. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand." Commander Jackson smiled grimly. "The facility you infiltrated was planning to attack a naval base where my men were stationed. Your intelligence allowed us to evacuate and prepare defenses. You saved the lives of over 200 Special Forces personnel." Another SEAL stepped forward, this one younger but with the same dangerous competence in his eyes. "Ma'am, we heard about your call sign from the mission. Word travels fast in the Spec Ops community when someone pulls off something that impressive." Sarah had earned the call sign Ghost during her secret mission, a reference to her ability to penetrate enemy airspace without being detected. She had no idea it had become known outside the classified community. Commander Jackson continued, "We also heard that you were kicked off this base for supposed insubordination. Every man in my unit wanted to come here personally to make sure that mistake was corrected." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled in. Admiral Morrison, who had been standing quietly in the corner, looked increasingly uncomfortable as he began to understand the magnitude of his error. "Captain Chen," Commander Jackson said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through blood and sacrifice, "on behalf of every Special Forces operator whose life you saved, thank you." He then did something that shocked everyone in the room. Commander Jackson, a man who had led missions that would never be declassified, came to attention and rendered a crisp military salute to Sarah. Every other SEAL in the room followed suit. The symbolism was powerful and unmistakable. The most elite warriors in the American military were showing their respect for a pilot who had been dismissed as unfit for service just months earlier. Admiral Morrison stepped forward, his face red with embarrassment. "Captain Chen, I believe I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you a complete reinstatement with full honors and recognition for your service." But Sarah was looking past the Admiral to the SEAL team that continued to hold their salutes. These men understood what real service meant. They knew the difference between political posturing and genuine heroism. Their recognition meant more to her than any official commendation ever could. "Thank you, Commander Jackson," Sarah said, returning their salutes with precision and pride. "I was just doing my job." Commander Jackson lowered his salute and grinned. "Ma'am, with respect, what you did was way above and beyond just doing your job. Word is that you've got skills that can't be taught and instincts that saved a lot of good people." As the SEAL team prepared to leave, Commander Jackson handed Sarah a special coin, the kind that elite units give to people they respect. "Captain, if you ever decide you want to work with the best of the best, you give me a call. We could use someone with your abilities." After the SEALs departed, Admiral Morrison and Sarah found themselves alone in the briefing room. The Admiral sat down heavily in one of the chairs, suddenly looking much older than his years. "Captain Chen," he said quietly, "I've been in the Navy for 30 years, and I thought I knew how to evaluate personnel. But I was wrong about you, and my mistake could have cost lives." Sarah sat down across from him, her anger from months ago replaced by something closer to pity. "Admiral, we all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." Morrison nodded slowly. "I want you to know that your record has been completely cleared of any negative marks. In fact, I'm recommending you for accelerated promotion to Major. Your country owes you a debt it can never fully repay." As Sarah left the base headquarters that day, she felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. She had proven herself not just to Admiral Morrison, but to the people whose opinions truly mattered. The SEALs who had saluted her understood what she was capable of, and their respect was worth more than any medal or commendation. Walking across the tarmac toward the flight line, Sarah saw the F-22 Raptors lined up and ready for action. Tomorrow, she would be leading a squadron of these incredible machines, protecting American interests around the world. But more importantly, she had learned something about herself during those months of exile and secret missions. She had discovered that true strength wasn't about never being knocked down. It was about getting back up, proving the doubters wrong, and continuing to serve even when the service was thankless and anonymous. Admiral Morrison had thought he was ending her career, but instead he had forged her into something stronger than she had ever been before. As an F-22 roared overhead, Sarah smiled and looked up at the sky that had always been her home. She was exactly where she belonged, and no one would ever doubt that again.